ISIS की थ्रेट को परसीव किया गया पूरे वर्ल्ड ओवर में और इंडिया में भी परसीव किया गया। इसके दो पक्ष हैं। The first dimension is that any idea, any religion which remains unnegotiated with the changing time and context is bound to bring certain kind of danger to the world community. कोई भी विचार, कोई संगठन, कोई धर्म जो आधुनिकता और वैज्ञानिक खोजों से अपने आप को संवाद नहीं करता है and refuse to evolve accordingly, that वह विश्व समाज के लिए कुछ ऐसी परिस्थितियां पैदा करने करता है जो उसके ओरिजिनल सोच में नहीं करता है। No society, no religion can claim that it can remain isolated. So world ecology, which consists of many religions, many ideas, many philosophies, evolving philosophies, that any religion, any idea has to interact and be a part of ecology in an organic sense. You cannot be part of ecology as an isolationist. Yeah, I am part of the multiculturalism. I am taking protection of multiculturalism to protect myself, not to strengthen the multiculturalism. बहुसांस्कृतिकवाद का संरक्षण आप तब तक लेते रहते हैं जब तक बहुसांस्कृतिकवाद आपको मजबूत करता है। लेकिन उस बहुसांस्कृतिकवाद को, उस मल्टीकल्चरलिज्म को, how much you are contributing? So every religion, every idea, every philosophy has to respond. Every idea, every religion, and the followers want that there should be multiculturalism. लेकिन बहुसांस्कृतिकवाद तभी अस्तित्व में रह सकता है जब बाकी धर्म, बाकी दर्शन, बाकी विचार उसमें कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहे हैं। They are not negating the multiculturalism. They are not negating the democracy. So multiculturalism, democracy, and harmony. It is not the burden of any particular religion, particular community, and particular society. You can't ask any particular community and society to give the protection of multiculturalism, and you can keep yourself aloof from that multiculturalism. आज विश्व समुदाय वास्तव में इस समस्या का सामना करना पड़ रहा है। आज हमारे सामने 3-4 प्रश्न हैं। हमारे सामने हमारे पास 6 वक्ता हैं। मैं इससे 3 मिनट में बात समाप्त करूंगा। हमारे सामने जो समस्या है कि ISIS का थ्रेट वर्ल्ड कम्युनिटी के पास कितना है। वर्ल्ड कम्युनिटी इस आइडिया को, इस परसीव्ड थ्रेट को कैसे कंटेस्ट कर सकता है, कैसे काउंटर कर सकता है। थ्रेट का परसेप्शन लॉन्ग टर्म में इंडिया के लिए कितना है? Can it be a greatest danger to India, or India is resisting it ideologically and also physically? तीसरा जो सवाल खड़ा होता है, how much it is threat to Islam still? Is it a new tool to deconstruct Islam from inside, ideologically and organizationally? ये कई सवाल आज ISIS के संबंध में हैं। एक लेमैन के लिए, मैं उसके लिए लेमैन हूँ, या जो लोग हैं वो अखबारों में पढ़ते हैं, न्यूज़ पढ़ते हैं, स्लेट्स पढ़ते हैं। इट इज द जॉब ऑफ एक्सप्लोरर्स टू हाईलाइट। हो सकता है हमारा परसेप्शन गलत हो सकता है हमारा परसेप्शन ठीक हो। दैट्स व्हाई दिस सेमिनार इज यूजफुल फॉर ऑल द पीपल कि कम से कम उस परसेप्शन को हम करेक्ट कर सके या हम एक नया परसेप्शन बना सकें।
A very brief introduction of our panel today. May I start with the chairperson of the panel, Shri D.C. Lal. He has been Director IB and he is one of the founding members of Vietnam. So Shri Tariq Patel, he is an Indian origin Canadian citizen. He is a writer and he has written a book on Chasing Mirage, the tragic illusions of an Islamic state. Professor Girijesh Pal is professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University and he works on West Asian issues. Shri Maruf Raja is a very senior journalist of this nation. You are aware of his credentials as journalist. Dr. Rajiv Nayan is senior fellow of IDSA, and Dr. Sujata Aishwarajima is professor at Jamia Millia University. We have published a book on emerging threats for the modern world, ISIS.
Our first speaker is Dr. Sujata Ashira Chima.
I'm going to tell you about the ideology of ISIS. We do read quite often about what ISIS or Daesh. Yeah. Okay. We read quite often about what ISIS does to what it is doing in Iraq and Syria, how much territory it has captured, what are the kind of crimes it is perpetrating, how much looting it is doing. But rarely does one talk about what is the ideology, the idea that animates the IS, what goes on in the mind of IS fighters. And today I'm going to tell you a brief story about it. Now, as I see the group, the IS, it is a millenarian group. And what is millenarianism? Millenarianism is a belief by a religious, political, or social group that the impending transformation, the major transformation of society is imminent, that the transformation would be quick, instantaneous, and sudden. Most millenarian groups consider, as you can see, the current society to be corrupt and its leaders unjust and wrong. They believe that only a powerful force, potent enough to bring about a dramatic change, can redress the ills of the society. And only a dramatic change can challenge the intractability. Intractability is the non-changeability of the current situation. So this change would be brought about or would be survived by the faithful who will lead the society into its purest form. These are the basic ideas of any millenarian group. And while many millenarian groups are pacifistic, peace-loving, some are also violent, and IS is one. Now why and how is IS millenarian? Let's have a look at it. It believes in two things: prophetic vision and end-time belief. End-time belief is the apocalyptic belief, the belief that the end of time is near, it is coming, and the humankind would be redeemed in a cataclysmic event. They believe, or at least argue, that they are God's chosen instrument for cleansing history and bringing about end times, which is rapidly approaching, and establishing an Islamic state which eventually leads to a final battle between good and evil near a small town of David in northern Syria in the Aleppo province. And this prophecy that they predict is from the Hadith of Abu Huraira. Hadith is what the Prophet has said, very simply, and it has been compiled by various people. So the Hadith narrated by Abu Huraira was one of the companions of Prophet Muhammad. And his narration is supposed to be authentic. That the Prophet said that the judgment day will come at David in Syria. Now, in the first issue of IS propaganda magazine, that is David, it features a quote from Abu Musa al-Zarqawi. Now, we know Abu Musa al-Zarqawi died in 2006, and he was the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and also the leader of ISIS. He said the spark has been lit here in Iraq, and its heat will continue to intensify by Allah's permission until it burns the Crusader armies in David. So David is an important place, and the name of IS propaganda magazine is also David. I'm showing you the location of David. Is in northern Syria. That is the border, the Syrian border with Turkey. Look at the location. Okay, next slide. This is the propaganda magazine, the cover of the propaganda magazine. So conquering David is extremely popular to the organization. So much so that they have named their English propaganda magazine David. Now, how and why is Daesh millenarian? Again, we continue. In page 4 of this magazine, David is the basis in which one of the greatest battles between Muslims and Crusaders will take place. Now, according to the hadith narrated by Abu Huraira, the story goes is that the Prophet said that the army from Medina will meet the Romans in David 1/3 of that army will run away, they are deserters. 1/3 will be martyrs, they are the best people in Islam, those who attain martyrdom. And 1/3 will defeat the Romans, they are the best ones. Then they will go ahead and conquer Istanbul, Constantinople at that time. And while they are celebrating victory, the Dajjal, the Shaitan, will appear and say, well, Messiah has come, you should go to your families. But the victors then will leave for their families, but they will realize that they have been tricked. At that moment, Jesus will appear and he will vanquish the Antichrist, that is the Shaitan, Dajjal, with his own hands, and he will embrace Islam. That is when people will become truly free and happy and they can pursue their own religion. That is the ideology animating the IS. Now, IS frequently refers to the town in their publication and videos. After the beheading of Peter Casey, one of the group spokesperson said, here we are, burying the first American crusader in the East. Okay, end of days vision is also essential to understanding. Now we have understood the prophetic vision, end of days, to the group desire to form a caliphate. Now Musa Sir Antonio, Australian preacher and one of the most influential recruiters of IS, said that the establishment of the caliphate, that is the IS caliphate, has been foretold. Now this caliphate, according to the prophetic vision, will go and sack Istanbul before it is beaten back by the army of the Shaitan or anti-Messiah, who will then get eventual death, and a few thousand jihadists will then usher in the apocalypse. That will be the cataclysmic moment. Now, what are the implications of Daesh's millenarianism? Belief that it is working to bring the world closer to redemption, working to bring the world closer to apocalypse. That is used is a very important propaganda tool for recruitment. People tend to join these groups out of extreme idealism. They are attracted by the extreme idealism of the group. Although ISIS promises profanity like plunder, booty, sex, etc., but it also appeals to higher sense of the people, a kind of fantasy that they are part of the redemption, that they are part of the end days. But IS propaganda has been a very powerful tool. It has affected the imagination of people all around the world. And just by the number of people who are joining the IS, it is having a certain appeal, definitely. The ideological message is unique and has proven very effective. Now, if you look at the achievement of the IS on ground, you will see that somehow they are fulfilling the prophetic and apocalyptic narrative. It will seem to confirm that the claim that IS is indeed God-appointed people for bringing forward end times. Now, what are the implications that we can see for India, world, the region of West Asia as such? Now, Daesh's millenarian idea has important implications, as we know. There are two aspects of Daesh's or IS threat. One is the Tafkiri idea, which is enmeshed with millenarianism. For the IS group, Sunni rulers of the region and their supporters have become corrupt. Now let's go back to millenarianism. Millenarian groups want to cleanse society. Millenarian groups want to usher in a pure society. So in the same vein, they say that Sunni rulers of the region, of the West Asian region, have become corrupt and their supporters have become corrupt and unjust. The society has become impure and they must be eliminated. So the society must be cleansed by the act of takfiri. Now takfiri comes from the Arabic word kufr, which means atheism, blasphemy, anything, paganism, heathenism. It means a whole lot of things. Kafir is an adjective which means somebody who has become infidel, atheist, renegade. Now takfir is an attribute too. This adjective is given to someone who has become a kafir. So takfiri is an act. Takfir is an act of pronouncing somebody kafir. And those who pronounce are called takfiris. Next. Now, what is the implication of the region? The takfiris believe that the Muslims should be those who have become kufr, have to be eliminated or excommunicated. And what is the punishment for apostate and hypocrites in Islam? It is death. So, as a primary, I just want to fix aberrant Muslims. Now, in the next stage, they want to fix the kafir living in Muslim lands, that is the Shias, the Yazidis, and the Christians. And that's why you see they are, perpetrating violence against them. In the third instance, Daesh would deal with the Jews who now have an identifiable territory in Israel, and the rest of the world in the east and the west, pagan and atheist world. Next. So what is the next case? What is the implication for India? Their plan of action is moving out from core to the other, from core to outer in concentric circle. Establish a base in a fixed area and use that base to project forward. IS would have preferred not to confront the West for a much greater period of time because they fall in the third concentric circles. Now, implications for India. What I feel that they have made too many enemies and they have become bigger than their ability to control what they have. Let's consider the data. There have been 2,000 airstrikes, 7,000 square kilometers of territories that they had captured has been taken away from them. They have been deprived of oil and gas facilities. There has been a disruption in the organization's finance. So basically, what I would say, they are a gang of vagrants with limited military skills. Even if they are able to get weapons of mass destruction, they will not be able to hold it. It is my assessment that in a short period of time, Daesh will disintegrate into smaller groups, which will also be dangerous, but will not constitute a danger to world peace. Next, please. I also question whether this group has the capacity or inclination to sustain a terror campaign in far-off land. No, actions in faraway places will create policy confusion as the group becomes more desperate. So this doesn't mean there is no cause for concern. The issue of returning fighting volunteers is vexing, and that has to be taken into account. When they return to their countries of origin with a fighting spirit and radicalized mind, with an extensive social infrastructure at their disposal, they are bound to engage in hostile activities. And that I consider the real threat, not the group itself for any part of the country except for the Middle East. Thank you.
C. Maruf Raza.
ISIS tends to take very selectively and odd words here and there from the writings and sayings from the times of the Prophet. The Prophet himself, as I understand, was illiterate, but those who made notes about what his sayings were led to the formal document, the Quran, which was compiled, as the author has rightly brought out, at the orders and instructions of the first caliph, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiqui, and thereafter followed through at the time of the second caliph, whose concentration more was on conquest and therefore is known historically as the man who really spread the Islamic empire from the Indus right up to Spain in many ways. But many others who subsequently came in and raised the flag of Islam were not exactly Islamic. And I think it's important for us as a society which is today a model of what a multicultural, multi-ethnic society should be. And I'm very proud of that model that India is. Some of you may have seen that I aggressively stand up for India against all the negative propaganda that the Pakistanis in particular like to throw at us, primarily because they build up their thesis on a bunch of lies. I think our thesis and modern India's thesis is built up on transparency and truth. How did the ISIS come about to become a phenomenon of such relevance so soon? It's important to understand that, ladies and gentlemen. It came about because the countries in the Arab world were too busy playing sectarian politics. They were supporting a group which, like in the 1980s, we saw our politicians support certain Sikh groups, which then became a Frankenstein monster leading to an assault on the Golden Temple, the Holy of Holies for the Sikh faith. Why did that happen? Because politicians here chose to use religious groups to create divide within a community. It is the same larger model that has been applied as a template in the Arab world. The Shia community is at odds with the Sunni supported Islamic State. It changed its name from Islamic State to Islamic State of Levant and back to Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and by and large is now going by the name ISIS. It is a political creation. Baghdadi, who is now claiming to be the caliph, and he expects all Muslims in the world to subscribe to his caliphate and caliphhood, is obviously living in a state of delusion. Because sensible Muslims have moved on beyond the Islam that was there 1400 years ago. I remember the words of Mahathir Mohamad, who is one of the makers of modern Malaysia, who said, if you are so hung up in the time of the prophets, why don't you go to office on camels? So I think we've got to move on. And I do not subscribe to the view that everything has been prescribed 1400 years in letter, spirit and word. You have to interpret, and therefore reading the Quran per se is a very important task that Muslims are expected to perform. But you must also read the interpretations of the Quran and what the Prophet said, because there is a view that whether the Quran was written in Arabic or Aramaic. If it was written in Arabic, it is the interpretation some of the harsher elements draw from it. But if you go to the other script, which was also prevalent at that time, it was Arabic. And that is a much milder, softer tone. Also in the time of the Prophet, two phases went through in his life. One was the phase when he was trying to promote the religion and he came under a lot of opposition in Mecca. When he moved on into a more secure environment and created his community in Medina, he became much more accommodative of various tones and spirits and cultures that existed around him, including the Jews, who were his greatest friends and supporters for a long time. It is one of the ironies that the Anglo-Saxon world was the one which was after the Jews for a long time. And if you want to know how it feels to be a Jew in that time, look at the famous Oscar-winning film Chariots of Fire. But more importantly, the Jews today are at odds with the Islamic world because of a certain creation that came out of the Balfour Declaration of 1917. So the Islamic world is really what we see as the Islamic world, but there are more Muslims outside the so-called Islamic world than there are in the Islamic world. Look at model states like Malaysia, Indonesia. They are also Islamic and they get on with their business pretty well without wielding swords. So why do we have to take the model only of the Islamic world that exists in the Arab world? There is the terminology they call Jahiliyyat. And I think it does apply to ISIS and many others who are still Jahils. Because Jahils are people who are unaccommodative, who are dogmatic, who are unable to accept any other culture, any other way of life except theirs. The ISIS ran into good luck because of the politics the Prime Minister of Iraq played, Mr. Maliki. He did away with the military leadership of Iraq, so Iraq's military was waiting to be hammered. And the ISIS went and hammered them and took over Mosul and Tikrit and other towns and took over $500 billion worth of money, which they were flushed with cash. But look at one of the recent issues of The Economist. The ISIS's ability to churn out oil and produce money has gone down by more than 70%. Its ability to attract loyalists is also going down. And the handful of people from India who are going, I'm sorry, they will continue to go, because as the book rightly brings out, on one side it says India's intelligence agencies are alert to what the ISIS is doing in terms of social media propaganda. But on the other side, it also brings out that our intelligence agencies are incapable of reading or understanding Arabic and various other Middle Eastern languages through which this social media propaganda is happening. I don't think that's true, but even if it's true, that we need to get our act together and stem the tide. And I think a handful of people, one of the facts that doesn't come out in this book also is that in India, Muslim groups, though there are hardline elements and they'll be even in the United States, so why not in India? That's a much more modern society. and more people are being picked up from Western universities who are scholars and are becoming bomb engineers for Islamic groups than they are being picked up from India, except by the one chap from Bangalore who became part of the attack on Glasgow airport. But the fact of the matter is that these Islamic groups, they cannot connect with all of India because Muslims in India live in pockets. They don't live like Pakistan, right across the board from north to south Pakistan. That's why the Al-Dawa school is such a successful experiment of the Lashkar-e-Toiba, which has thousands of students who are potential recruits for hardline groups. We don't have that. All we have to do is become a little more alert to monitoring trends and activities and where funding goes. But I think, the map that is shown, this is the delusion that ISIS is living in, that we'll get into Khorasan one day, which includes India. But I'd be very, very surprised if they get anywhere close to taking over India. I mean, it's a ragtag army. You can beat the Iraqi army, which had no officer leadership, so the Iraqis ran away. Try taking on the Indian army and you'll get a bloody nose. Okay, so please understand that this country is not up for grabs, ladies and gentlemen. And that is the central point I want to bring out. Also, I want to bring out that the author has obviously an intellectual agenda to follow. It becomes very obvious when reading the book, because the book is clearly following a very right-wing line. But there was a moderate line in India and Islam. Islam did not, ladies and gentlemen, come to India with the sword. The sword only brought killing, plunder and loot for the rulers who came. Islam came to India through the route of Sufism. And Sufism's color is saffron, it is not green. So please understand that Islam in India spread because the message of various great philosophers, thinkers, writers who, as much as today's Swamis, were peers of those days. They were the same people. And therefore India's Islam is very different from the Wahhabi Islam that the Saudis and others push for. And if we take enough measures and ensure that those guys who go to Saudi Arabia and come back indoctrinated to try and further indoctrinate India, and it's been in the news, the IB has highlighted the fact there have been more than 12,000 clerics who come back from there with some kind of funding and indoctrination and trying to talk to about 1.2 million Indians in various mosques. We must curtail those sermons. Freedom of religion does not mean that you challenge the very constitutional ethic on which the nation is based. Up to a point you can draw a line. So I think we need to, this book certainly does highlight a few facts. For example, no Islamic caliphate was a sort of a golden rule, a golden era of Islam as people were made to believe. Because many caliphates, and starting from the time of Muawiyah onwards, the Islamic caliphs not only made it monarchical rule, which the Prophet was against, otherwise he would have made Hazrat Ali his successor, who was his brother-in-law and his son, who was his cousin and his son-in-law, but he made another elder who was also a relative his successor. And their subsequent successors till Hazrat Ali's turn came were older and in their own way reasonably accomplished. So Islam was meant to be a meritocracy. Islam has been destroyed by those who talk of monarchy. And Saudi Arabia sits as the champion of the two mosques, but they are at the heart. Even today, the new Saudi king that has been appointed is still a son of King Al Saud, who created Saudi Arabia, 67 years ago or whenever. So the fact of the matter is that a lot of things that we see about Islam, while this literature brings out one sort of experiences, we need to understand that there is a lot more to the religion, lot more to the philosophy that is accommodative of other religions. It is not a religion of violence as has been seen and projected. It must be understood as such. The second thing that which is very important also to understand, that in Islam, people have inherited a Muslim name, have inherited a Muslim tradition only in as much as the cultural edifice of that, not the tradition of the life of the Prophet. A simple example is, Prophet talked about living a humble and a modest life. These caliphs finally veered into complete debauchery, complete, a level of a level of lavishness that Islam never prescribed. So when the caliphate collapsed, and even before that, certain caliphs were tied to the rods and tied to a pole and beaten in front of the public by rods by conquering rulers. So Islam has been completely misrepresented by those who claim to represent Islam. And if this book gives that account, good for it. But I think the book ends up painting a one-sided picture. So therefore, with due respect, I don't agree with the author's thesis. But I do compliment the author to put together such a deep and researched document. But inasmuch as there is volume of information available about the excesses committed by Islamic rulers, there is also a volume of evidence of the good work done by people who work for social harmony, peace, etc. The Mogla rebellion in Kerala notwithstanding, the excesses of sultans notwithstanding. All that is brought out. I think it's very important to understand, because you see, for instance, in one place he says, he's quoted a Maulana Azad, who at least I understood as a person to be a relatively sensible person. I got 3 minutes, I know. And he's quoted Maulana Azad to say that he was an extremist with extremely fanatical views. I think it doesn't come out in the rest of Indian history. So if it was there, I think more of Indian history needs to address that. He's also talked about the fact that how Gandhiji supported the Khilafat movement, which laid the foundation of the process of partition. Narendra Singh Sarila and various other authors who talked about the whole thesis of partition would argue otherwise. They say it was a British initiative in which Jinnah became a pawn at the initiative of Aga Khan to create a buffer state against the Soviet expansion through Afghanistan, and that buffer state that was to be created in what is now the AFPAC region was to be the basis of Pakistan. Eventually, Radcliffe drew lines and we ended up having a Pakistan of the size that we have.
We have now Dr. Rajiv Nayan.
I have to talk about one very narrow point of ISI's emergence. Dr. Aishwarya mentioned about that. That is how this violent tradition may become more violent if it has got very deadly tool of terror. And that tool of terror is weapons of mass destruction. So I'm just going to discuss about that. I'm going to raise some questions. Is ISI really interested? Dr. Aishwarya raised some ideological point of ISI existence. Does its ideology permit to acquire weapons of mass destruction? When we were discussing about Al Qaeda's desire or inclination to acquire weapons of mass destruction, many argued Islam doesn't permit. Again, comes the question: what all Islam permit? Islam doesn't permit to acquire weapons of mass destruction. But some of the leaders of Al Qaeda, like the most famous leader, Osama bin Laden, was very categorical. It wanted to acquire weapons of mass destruction because it would increase its lethality. His successor, Jawahiri, also made it very clear that Al Qaeda is interested in acquiring weapons of mass destruction. So, is ISI interested in acquiring weapons of mass destruction? In Syria, the civil authorities seized a laptop. Laptop of one of the functionaries of ISIS. And this laptop had thousands of documents. And after those documents were read, and it was very clear that ISI is not just interested in Saturn. It is very much interested in profit. It is interested in what Dr. Aishwarya talked about, a world where women will be available, a world where you have to have very physical authority to carry forward the task. And for that task, they don't have any ideological inhibition in acquiring weapons of mass destruction. So there is no ideological problem for ISIS to acquire. So do they have resources? This is the second question which comes. Maruf talked about funding, how they had looted some banks, how they had acquired oil fields, and they have got resources. So these are resources that are available to them. But the real issue is how realistic is the scenario to have acquisition of technological capability for developing weapons of mass destruction. For a decade and a half, we have been discussing about can, quote unquote, generally again this again contested, Islamic terrorists acquire weapons of mass destruction. And then what is discussing? It is no longer confined to the think tanks or universities or policy communities of Western countries. Before 2000, to say precisely, 9/11, generally it was a remote possibility discussed by United States, at times by Canada, and some of the European countries. But after 9/11 and after the turmoil in Pakistan, this is being considered a real possible reality. So we have to discuss about that. So generally, what is the general perception? The perception is that terrorists may have difficulties in acquiring nuclear weapons, full-fledged nuclear weapons, but they can have radiological weapons very easily. They can have chemical weapons, while biological weapons is machine, but still it is cheaper to acquire and it is easier to acquire. So again, I am coming to ISIS. I will move very fast. First, famous Mosul district, the downfall of Mosul. And there was a statement given by the Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations. And the ambassador said that 40 kilograms of uranium is missing. It really alarmed the world. All started seeing the possibility. And IAEA also jumped in the fray. And IAEA came out with the conclusion that it was a very low grade uranium. But it was contested by others. And the University of Mosul University started contesting, and one of the inspectors, or IAEA inspectors, his name was George Haley. He also came out with some description, and that description indicated that the organization may have acquired uranium. It may not be enriched uranium, which can be easily converted into nuclear weapons. But it had low grade uranium. I would again say, all the description which has come, let's say that it is natural uranium, UO2, which is generally used in the reactor. So it may not be full-fledged weapon, but there are other materials, and one of the British flags we are just discussing, they are recruiting from different countries. And one of the reports from the United Kingdom revealed that it had got some materials which may be used in conventional weapons to make it dirty bomb. So that possibility is very much there. And again, there could be contestation there also. Second was that Humayun Tariq was from United Kingdom, and he was working with them. Then my second issue was about biological weapons. Could they do it? There were three leaders gave three different versions. Again, this phenomenon which we are trying to understand is quite complicated. One was given by US Homeland Secretary. He said we don't have any credible evidence to say to assure that ISIS can really make biological weapons. But CIA in one of its leaked classified reports mentioned that it has got some mobile systems which is very difficult to detect, and that has got some old time Iraq regimes, means Saddam's regimes, rudimentary system, which may be easily converted. Again, second was by United the reach to acquire these three weapons of mass destruction. So again, within every country there was contradiction. One political leadership is saying that it is not possible, then the professional or the security agency saying no, it is possible. At one time, security agency not possible, the security leadership is saying. So this is happening. Now I come to the third point, because I have my limited. How many minutes? Oh, still 7 minutes. Okay. Then I just move to the chemical weapons portion. Again, here we talked about United States, the role of United States, how they have messed up. One of the leadership said that one of our allies, Turkey, Turkey basically patronized ISIS, and now we have to face what is happening now. The same way, when George Bush attacked Iraq, and at that time, the general left to the center understanding was it was an unnecessary attack, there was no because of mass destruction. But last year, one of the left to the center, newspaper New York Times, came out with a big report. And that report says no, some abandoned chemical weapons existed, and Iraqi soldiers were affected by that. This corroding system was just left. And those corroding systems, which were not dismantled, were not disposed of, have been captured by these ISIS people. And now this question is coming, can they use it? This corroding system, can they use it? Yes, very much. Now they are coming out with this opinion, they're coming out with this view that yes, this corroding system it can be reused. Some of the chemicals which can be utilized by ISIS. And this danger has been highlighted by one of the best Middle East analysts, George Rosenberg, in his book Third Target. And in Third Target, he said that I am writing a fiction, but this fiction is also painting a scenario. And this scenario must be, all these scenarios must be taken seriously, even if it is in the fictional form, but you have to take it seriously. So this is the situation. So the final assessment I can, in the final assessment I can say that even if they are not using all the weapons of mass destruction, but they are not against acquiring it. And they may gradually, they are not removed. See, 70,000 kilometers, they have been 7,000 square kilometers. If they continue to hold their territory, if they continue to believe their caliphate, and if they continue to have the concept of state, this is just not Islamic terrorist group. They are not just non-state actor. They are also claiming to have a state, and then they will be seriously pursuing these weapons of mass destruction acquisition, and then it will become really deadly and dangerous. Once they do it, they have got capability, they have got technology, everything they have got. So then the question is coming: what will happen to India? For us, again, it's a matter of curiosity. We are saying, okay, it is happening in some remote region like West Asia or Middle East, but we should not be that complacent. As the map shows, that north and western part of India is figuring in their map. So it's a problem for us also, and we must join the forces. Join the forces which are fighting this ISIS. We have OPCW working for that. We have United Nations working for that. IAU working for that. So we must work with them. And we have attended all the 3 nuclear security summits. And the focus of the nuclear security summits is to just attack, prevent nuclear terrorism happening. So we have to work with international organizations and all the forces which may counter ISIS. Because we should not assume that it will not harm us because we have got it. Because it's Kashmir, repeatedly they are talking about Kashmir, right? Somehow it was not talked about.
सवाल असेसमेंट थ्रेट की जब बात करते हैं तो असेसमेंट बहुत महत्वपूर्ण करता है, क्योंकि थ्रेट को जब रिस्पांस देंगे तो जब तक आपके पास असेसमेंट सही नहीं होगा तो आपका रिस्पांस गड़बड़ हो सकता है। जैसा अभी राजीव भाई ने कहा और पहले भी बात आया अभी स्थापित हो चुकी है कि इराक में WMD का एक फिक्शन को एक सत्य बना करके बताया गया, उसके बाद जो हुआ उसका परिणाम ये है कि आज हमारे पास ISIS है। So therefore, friends, I would like you to take a very rational and sober assessment that what exactly is threat, how serious is the threat, इस threat का source क्या है, तो इसके बारे में हमको समझ बनानी चाहिए। मेरे ख्याल से इसको अगर हम इस पर केंद्रित हो तो ये बहुत महत्वपूर्ण विषय है जिस पर हम आज सब चर्चा कर रहे हैं। और मैं इंडियन पॉलिसी फाउंडेशन को बधाई देना चाहूँगा कि उन्होंने इसको पब्लिक डिस्कोर्स को शुरुआत की है। विश्वविद्यालय के अंदर तो हम लोग इसकी चर्चा करते रहते हैं, लेकिन एक पब्लिक स्फेयर में इसका डिस्कशन करना भी बहुत अनिवार्य है, क्योंकि विषय ऐसा है जिसके बारे में समझ और नासमझी से हमारे रिएक्शन खासतौर से भारतीय संदर्भ में काफी कुछ गुरुत्वाकर्षण है। ISIS के अंदर इस्लामिक वर्ड जरूर है, लेकिन ये इसको इस्लाम के नाम पर ही समझना, इसका सरलीकरण है। जो पूरी बहस अभी हम इस्लाम को केंद्रित करेंगे तो हम शायद इसको समझ नहीं पाएंगे। ये सही है कि ये कुल ज्योग्राफिकल एरिया के अंदर है जहाँ के इस्लामिक धर्म है, इस्लाम के अनुयायी लोग हैं, और जब वो किसी बात को लेके उठते हैं तो जो आइडियोलॉजी बनती है उसमें इस्लाम जरूर आता है, इस पे दो राय नहीं। लेकिन क्या संस्था पूरी तरह से इस्लामिक है या इस्लामिक ही है, इसको हमको थोड़ा गंभीरता से देखना। मेरी समझ ये है कि अगर हम देखें कि ऐसा ही पैदा कर, देखिए ये ऐसा कॉम्प्लेक्स विषय है कि इसकी एंट्री हम किसी भी एंट्री पॉइंट से कर सकते हैं और जस्टिफाई कर सकते हैं। यू कैन जस्टिफाई इन टर्म्स ऑफ हिस्ट्री, यू कैन जस्टिफाई इन टर्म्स ऑफ टेक्स्ट ऑफ कुरान, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा व्हाटएवर इट इज। लेकिन मैं सोचता हूँ कि अगर हम आज को कंटेम्पोरेरी संदर्भ में समझना चाहते हैं तो इतिहास के साथ साथ जो नई ऑब्जेक्टिव कंडीशन जो पैदा हुई जिसकी वजह से ISI पैदा हुआ है, उसके ऊपर उसका आंकलन सही होना आवश्यक है। ISI की जैसा कि हम सभी जानते हैं कॉमन अंडरस्टैंडिंग है जिसके बारे में कि इसकी शुरुआत एक जो हुई है वो खास तौर से इराक के अंदर जब अमेरिकन आक्रमण हुआ, उसके बाद जब सद्दाम हुसैन गए, उसके बाद अमेरिका ने सोचा कि वो वहाँ पे खास तरह की राजनीति लाएंगे जिससे वो डेमोक्रेसी कहते हैं। ये उनकी नासमझ थी, क्योंकि डेमोक्रेसी बाहर से लाई नहीं जाती, आप सब इसको स्वीकार करेंगे। डेमोक्रेसी जमीन से जुड़ी हुई वस्तु स्थितियों से पैदा होती है। उसके बाद जो वहाँ उन्होंने शक्ति संतुलन में जो परिवर्तन किया, अभी तक इस पूरे अरब राष्ट्रों में सुन्नी इस्लाम के अनुयायियों का उनका दबदबा बना हुआ था, जो कि अमेरिकन स्पॉन्सरशिप पे चलता रहा, इसमें दो राय नहीं। लेकिन जो 10-11 में एक क्रांति किस्म की अरब राष्ट्रों में आ रही थी, जो ट्यूनीशिया से इजिप्ट तक आई और इजिप्ट के बाद आगे बढ़ी थी, उसके बाद उसमें डिस्टॉर्शंस पैदा हो गए हैं। उस क्रांति ने एक परिप्रेक्ष्य बनाया और उसको ध्यान में रखते हुए अमेरिका की जो नीति थी इस क्षेत्र को लेकर के वो बदली। उसमें ये साफ नजर आने लगा कि अमेरिका वेस्ट एशिया को लेकर अपनी जो नीति है उसमें रीअसेसमेंट कर रहा है, और रीअसेसमेंट करने के 2-3 कारण बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है जिसकी तरफ मैं आपका ध्यान आकर्षित करना चाहूंगा। सबसे महत्वपूर्ण ये है कि अमेरिका की जो एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट है इस रीजन से धीरे धीरे खत्म होती जा रही है, कम होती जा रही है। American energy security is no more tied with the oil and gas available from this West Asian region or the Persian Gulf. So it provides them a kind of a leverage that the stakes are there, but the stakes are not that high कि हम उसके बिना हमारी एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी जो बढ़ा जाए। शेल गैस अभी आई है, उसके बाद तो अमेरिका तेल का निर्यात राष्ट्र करने जा रहा है, उसकी एक नई जियोपॉलिटिक्स पैदा हो रही है, वो अलग बात है। दूसरी जो बात आई, जो अमेरिका के समझ में बात आई कि जो उन्होंने शक्ति संतुलन यहाँ बनाया था, जिसमें इजिप्ट एक मोहरा था और सऊदी अरेबिया एक मोहरा था, क्योंकि अरब अपराइजिंग के बाद इजिप्ट वो शक्तिशाली राष्ट्र नहीं रह गया था, उनको ये लगा कि अब इजिप्ट वो भूमिका नहीं निभा पाएगा शक्ति संतुलन की, और सऊदी अरेबिया को 9/11 के बाद से उनके अंदर एक शंका पैदा हो गई कि सऊदी अरेबिया उतना विश्वसनीय राष्ट्र नहीं है, इसलिए उनके बारे में उनका ओपिनियन रिवाइज होता चला गया। तो इन चीजों को ध्यान में रखते हुए और फिर खास तौर से उनको ऐसा लगा, जैसे कि बाद में बहुत से डेटा स्टडीज ने स्पष्ट भी किया कि सऊदी अरेबिया ने काफी हद तक ओवरटली कवर्टली टेररिस्ट एक्टिविटीज को इस क्षेत्र में प्रोत्साहित किया वहां भी इस्लाम के नाम। तो ये जो नया आंदोलन पैदा हुआ उस पर ये लगा कि ये महसूस किया जाने लगा अमेरिकन फॉरेन पॉलिसी एस्टेब्लिशमेंट में कि नाउ इट्स टाइम that we should bring back Iran as a counterbalancing force in the region. So जो नया शक्ति संतुलन उन्होंने बनाना शुरू किया उसमें ईरान की भूमिका है। मैं यहाँ पे मेरी समझिए कि जो न्यूक्लियर डील हुई वो एक न्यूक्लियर से बहुत महत्वपूर्ण मुद्दा नहीं है। उससे बेसिकली अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच एक राजनीतिक समझ पैदा की जा रही है इस क्षेत्र शक्ति संतुलन के, और जो इतनी लंबी बहस चली जो नेगोशिएशन हुआ उसमें न्यूक्लियर महत्वपूर्ण था मोर एज ए एंट्री पॉइंट, बट लार्जली इज ए पॉलिटिकल प्रोजेक्ट। द अमेरिकन्स आर वेरी क्लियर अबाउट इट कि इस क्षेत्र में शक्ति संतुलन अब उस किस्म के वहाबी इस्लाम के नाम से नहीं चलाया जा सकता, तो उन्होंने ईरान की भूमिका स्वीकार की। ये अपने आप में अरब राष्ट्रों के लिए, खासतौर से सुन्नी राष्ट्रों में और खासतौर से सऊदी अरेबिया कुड लाइक द आइडिया दैट दे हैव बीन अबैंडन्ड। इट इज आउट ऑफ दिस वन मेजर कंसिडरेशन कमिंग फ्रॉम द एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड। रीजनली क्या हुआ कि जब इराक में नई सरकार बनी तो नई सरकार में डेमोक्रेसी के नाम पे, जो कि सही था क्योंकि शिया लोग ज्यादा थे नंबर पे, इसलिए उनकी सरकार बनाई गई। दुर्भाग्य की बात ये हुई कि जो शिया सरकार बनी उसने सुन्नी के जो सेक्ट के लोग थे उनको बिल्कुल सिस्टम से मार्जिनलाइज करना शुरू कर दिया। इस प्रोसेस में दो चीजें महत्वपूर्ण है आईएसआई को समझने के लिए। वन इज दैट इराकी regime's policy to marginalize the Sunni Iraqi population. Secondly, the policy of American decision maker as well as the rulers in Iraq to totally dismantle the apparatus of the Ba'ath party. Now, the moment अगर आप देखें, अगर आज आप थोड़ा सा स्क्रूटनी करेंगे तो जो लोग आईएसआई में जो लीडरशिप दे रहे हैं, खासतौर से मिलिट्री लीडरशिप जो है वो बेसिकली उन लोगों के जो सद्दाम हुसैन के टाइम में उस सेना से जुड़े हुए। सवाल मैं आपके सामने जो रखना चाहता हूँ, उस बात पार्टी के लोग जो कि रेडिकल और एक्सट्रीमिस्ट इस्लाम में बिलीव नहीं करते थे, बल्कि उस जमाने के बगदाद में आप जाइए शाम को देखें कि नदी के किनारे बैठ करके लोग बियर पी रहे हैं और ये तय करते थे कि किसने कितनी बोतल बियर पी, करते तब उठते थे। कहने उस बगदाद की मुझे अभी भी याद है, जब मैं जाने का मौका मिला वहाँ रात को 10 बजे 11 बजे जो महिलाएं थी वो सड़क में घुमा करती थी। आप किसी ऑफिस में चले जाइए वहाँ पे वुमेन आपको नजर आएगी। उस किस्म की जो सोशियोलॉजी थी, उस सोशियोलॉजी को इन्होंने जो नई सत्ता आई उसने उनको मार्जिनलाइज करना शुरू कर दिया और स्थिति ये बनी कि पूरे इस क्षेत्र में एक किस्म का जो इकोनॉमिक, सोशल एंड पॉलिटिकल मार्जिनलाइजेशन इन लोगों को पैदा हुआ, उसका लाभ उठाने करके आईएसआई पॉपुलर बनी। तो मैं जो पॉइंट आपकी तरफ आपका ध्यान आकर्षित करना चाहता हूँ कि जब हम आईएसआई के बारे में मूल्यांकन करते हैं तो ये जान के चले कि वो एक सोशियो इकोनॉमिक एंड पॉलिटिकल प्रोसेसेस पैदा हुए हैं इस क्षेत्र में, जिसने इस किस्म के रेडिकलाइजेशन प्रोसेस को बहुत आगे बढ़ाने में मदद की। और यही कारण है कि आज आपको नजर आएगा कि यमन में देखिए फॉर एग्जाम्पल, आप नई स्थिति फिर पैदा हो रही है। यमन में भी लड़ाई जो हो रही है वो सऊदी अरेबिया ईरान के बीच की लड़ाई है, लेकिन उसका फायदा पूरी तरह से आईएसआई को मिल रहा है, क्योंकि यमन में भी जो वहाँ के जो डिफेंस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, जो इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं, वो टोटली खत्म कर दिए जा रहे हैं। तो कुल मिला के एक ऐसी स्थिति वहाँ पे पैदा की जा रही है जहाँ पे लोगों को ये लगता है कि हमको सुरक्षा की भावना, सुरक्षा जो मिल सकती है वो we can only get security from the people who can protect us। यही इसी वजह से अगर आप देखें तो बहुत सी रिपोर्टें क्षेत्र से जो आ रही है उसमें ये बताया गया है सीरिया में जो आ रहे लोग रिफ्यूजी के कैंप से लोग वापस जा रहे हैं इस इलाके में जो आईएसआई के नियंत्रण में है। उनको मालूम है कि वहाँ पे उनकी जीवन की सुरक्षा, जीवन को लेकर के सुरक्षा को समस्या पैदा हो सकती है, लेकिन फिर भी उनको लगता है कि वही एक ऐसी जगह है जहाँ पॉसिबली दे कैन सर्वाइव एंड लिव। So this is a very paradoxical situation which is emerging in this region, that a new kind of legitimacy is being given to these violent forces by the politics of the region. Therefore, my submission here will be that unless until there is not a political correction in the region, you will not find that the process like ISI can be taken care of. ये सही है कि आज जिस किस्म से मिलिट्री अटैक किया जा रहा है, जो अमेरिका और ईरान की मदद से हम देख रहे हैं कि various kind of attempts are being made to eradicate them, लेकिन सवाल उठता है कि क्या आप उनको फिजिकली आप हटा देंगे उससे, तो क्या उससे वो आइडिया जिसके बारे में सुजाता ने थोड़ा आपका ध्यान आकर्षित किया, वो आइडिया जिसके आधार पे आईएसआई बनता है, वो आइडिया भी जीवित रहे। इसलिए आवश्यक बात ये है कि इस क्षेत्र के अंदर जो राजनीतिक समीकरण है उनमें परिवर्तन लाया जाए, और ये परिवर्तन मुझे नहीं लगता कि आज के संदर्भ में जो अंतर्राष्ट्रीय उसमें अमेरिका पूरी तरह से इन परिवर्तन को ला सकता है, क्योंकि अमेरिका इस समय पॉपुलर लेवल पे वेस्ट एशिया में उनकी डिस्क्रेडिटेड पावर है। अमेरिका के अंदर वो दिलचस्पी भी नहीं है कि बियॉन्ड ए पॉइंट को जाकर के इस से इंगेज करे, और अमेरिका के अंदर जो पब्लिक ओपिनियन है उसके अंदर भी ये इस किस्म का अप्रूवल नहीं है कि आप हमारे लोग जाकर के वहाँ किसी और की लड़ाई लड़ो। वहाँ तो ये भी कहा जाता है अमेरिका में कि जब हम वहाँ से तेल नहीं ला रहे हैं, तो वहाँ से चीन, भारत और एशिया के देश वहाँ से तेल ला रहे हैं, तो तेल की सुरक्षा की जिम्मेदारी हमारी जो होगी, जिम्मेदारी होनी चाहिए एशिया के राष्ट्र। कहने का तात्पर्य कि जो पब्लिक ओपिनियन अमेरिका में है, बहुत चूंकि अमेरिका एक डेमोक्रेसी है, वहाँ पब्लिक ओपिनियन मैटर करता है, इसलिए अमेरिका की भी दिलचस्पी कि उसके साथ जो इंटेंसिव इंगेजमेंट वो कॉस्ट शेयर करने को अमेरिका सरकार नहीं करेगा। इन सब को ध्यान में रखते हुए प्रश्न उठता है कि हमको क्या करना चाहिए। ये बहुत बड़ा सवाल उठता है, क्या हम तटस्थ होकर के वहाँ बैठे रहें, यहाँ बैठे रहें, और वहाँ जब भी कोई झगड़ा हो हम हिंदुस्तानी को वहाँ से लेकर के वापस आए। ये इसके बारे में हमको सोचना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि मेरी समझ है कि आने वाले 5 से 7 साल तक इस क्षेत्र में ये टेंशन बढ़ता ही चला जाएगा, क्योंकि अभी नियर फ्यूचर में कोई ऐसी डेमोक्रेटिक रिजीम आने की वहाँ संभावनाएं नजर नहीं आ रही। तो एक सवाल जो भारत सरकार के लिए महत्वपूर्ण है कि जो हमारी मैन पावर एक्सपोर्ट की जो नीति है, जिसको हम सेलिब्रेट करते हैं, जो रेमिटेंसेस को बहुत सेलिब्रेट करते हैं, द टाइम हैज कम दैट वी हैव टू मेक एन असेसमेंट। शुड वी remain a manpower exporting country when we are talking of make in India? Does it make sense to you? This has to be examined. Because it remains a fact कि जो आदमी यहाँ से जाता है और जब 10 साल का 15 साल तक वो सऊदी अरब में रहता है, तो जब लौट के होके गला में आता है तो वो दूसरा नजर आता है। इसमें दो राय नहीं। अगर आप कोई भी ग्राउंड एम्पिरिकल स्टडी की गई है लोग, उससे बहुत स्पष्ट हो जाता है कि वो जब जाता है यहाँ से, जब लौट के आता है, वो दो डिफरेंट किस्म का व्यक्तित्व होता है, और उसके अंदर एक नई किस्म की सोच पैदा होती है जो हमारे लिए किन्हीं परिस्थितियों में एक समस्या बन सकती है। तो हमको ये सोचना पड़ेगा कि क्या ये एसेट है, ये लायबिलिटी है कि जो हमारे 6 से 7 मिलियन को लेकर वहाँ जाते हैं। क्या हमको ये एक सवाल है जिसको अपन एक पॉलिसी मैन पावर की मैनेजमेंट की पॉलिसी को बनाना बहुत आवश्यक हो गया है, ये मैं कहना चाहूँगा। दूसरी बात ये है कि ये सही बात है कि हम ये क्षेत्र में हम एनर्जी पे इस क्षेत्र पे डिपेंड करते हैं। अगर इस क्षेत्र में क्राइसिस चल रही है तो एनर्जी को लेकर के हमको अपनी सुरक्षा को ध्यान देना पड़ेगा। तो हमको कैसे पहल करनी चाहिए? ये भी भ्रम होगा कहना कि भारत अपने आप में वो भूमिका निभा सकता है जो अमेरिका ने निभाई है या कोई और राष्ट्र निभा सकता है, इतनी हमारी शक्ति नहीं है। लेकिन ये भी सच है कि हमारी इन देशों के अंदर एक साख है। उस साख को हम कैसे एक डिप्लोमेसी में कन्वर्ट करके एक रोल भूमिका निभा सकते हैं, ये एक बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज हमारे सामने है। मुझको ऐसा लगता है कि अगर इंडियन डिप्लोमेसी इन कंजंक्शन विद एशियन पावर tries to promote a kind of engagement in the region, which in the first step de-escalates tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia, because हमारे ईरान से संबंध ऐसे हैं कि हम उसे बातचीत कर सकते हैं। हमारे सऊदी अरेबिया भी, जैसा हम जानते हैं कि सऊदी अरेबिया के राजा जो किंग हैं, उन्होंने प्राइम मिनिस्टर से यहाँ बातचीत की, जिससे पहले यमन पे जब आक्रमण कर रहे थे तो उन्होंने इंडियन प्राइम मिनिस्टर को कॉन्फिडेंस में लिया। इसका मतलब इंडिया मैटर्स इन देयर स्कीम ऑफ थिंग्स एज वेल। अगर ये स्थिति है और इसमें दो राय नहीं है, तो हमको ये सोचना चाहिए कि हम एक ऐसी एशिया बेस्ड इंटरवेंशन की बात करें जिससे कि वहाँ के टेंशन को डीएस्केलेट किया जाए, क्योंकि टेंशन को डीएस्केलेट करना बहुत आवश्यक है, क्योंकि उसका नुकसान कई जगहों पे अपने अपने तरीके से पड़ेगा, लेकिन हम ज्यादा वल्नरेबल है, इसमें दो राय नहीं। और अगर वो थ्रेशोल्ड के आगे बढ़ जाएगा तो देन इट विल बी वेरी डिफिकल्ट फॉर अस टू take an objective assessment of situation. We will carry away by the security paranoids. So that is the point I am quite concerned about. हमारे सोसाइटी में अगर सिक्योरिटी डायमेंशन ज्यादा आगे बढ़ता चला जाएगा तो हो सकता है जो सिक्योरिटी डेवलपमेंट के बीच की जो डिकोटमी है, उस डिकोटमी का हम शिकार हो सकते हैं। तो मुझको ऐसा लगता है कि अगर मल्टीकल्चरलिज्म को ध्यान में रखते हुए इंडिया एज आइडिया को सस्टेन करना चाहते हैं तो ये आवश्यक है कि भारत I was hoping that I would hear something about Professor Chima's, an expansion on Professor Chima's very well explained hadith that defines not just ISIS's view of the world, but every Muslim's view of the world. Now, this is a very difficult subject because within every Muslim is a Muslim patriot. You know, it's like being fans of Manchester United. You really don't play soccer, but you like to wear its t-shirt. So most Muslims have no association with any mosque. But even a Marxist like Tariq Ali gets worked up and gets patriotic. And any truth that is spoken in an audience of non-Muslims is considered traitorship. But truth and patriotism towards your faith should have been saved for the time before the jets crashed into New York buildings and the Pentagon. Brothers and sisters, the time has passed for what I would suggest is the nafra of political correctness. We are at war. And whether Muslims like it or not, we have been at war since the day Prophet Muhammad died. Very few of us know that he is the only Muslim not to have had a namaz-e-janazah, if you know what I'm talking about. For 18 hours in the summer heat of June 632, his body was surrounded in the heat of Medina, while every other companion of Muhammad was fighting a couple of miles away at each other's throat. The knives were drawn and swords were pulled out. When the Prophet Muhammad said, "Give me a pen, I wish to write something," the future second caliph of Islam, Umar, said, "Don't give the old man a pen. He might write something that is against the Quran." I am simply writing from the biography of the Prophet, the Sirah, which is a requirement of Muslim Sharia, where the Quran cannot be understood because it is not in chronological order, can only be understood if read with the 1600-page biography of Prophet Muhammad, which I can assure you most Muslims have never read, or the 1600 volumes of the Hadith, which of course no Muslim has read. And until the colonial period, when all of this Arabic was foreign to most Muslims, because 80% of the Muslims were not Arabs, and out of them, 80% were illiterate. As long as we were illiterate and could not read Arabic, some of us were sane, some of us were Darashiko, some of us were Walid bin Ajmer, some brought Islam to Bangladesh, which by the way is the only Islamic island that has no border with any other Islamic country. No armies went there. But it was more of an ignorance of the harshness of Sharia that made us better human beings. And far from Sufis bringing Islam to India, Islam came to India on the Malabar coast. I was just there yesterday at the Cherwan Mosque, which is the first mosque built in India during the life of Prophet Muhammad in the year 629. However, Muslims don't celebrate that because what's being celebrated was a mosque. The Hindus gave it, we built it, we started living with them, and life went on. We celebrate that man who invited our country. That's Muhammad bin Qasim. And you can go to Old Delhi and see Hijaz books in Urdu are available that tell you of how he slaughtered Hindus with how much pride. So let us not make the mistake of saying that Islam needs a reformation. What we need is a separation between Islam and politics. I have no problem of anyone believing that a horse can fly. Just as I have no problem in any Christian believing a snake can talk. My grandmother believed the world was flat. I don't have a problem. My problem comes when you say public law will be determined by these divine texts that in some books say a snake can talk and in some books say a horse can fly. And then it made a refuting step. And while discussing ISIS, we are discussing primarily military matters, tactical matters, because they are easy to discuss. Nobody will have a visceral reaction like the BHP has today called for the banning of a film by Kamal Hassan. Stoke your anger from inside because it's imprecise. You discuss military matters, you sound like an academic. Everybody says, oh really, there were 30 days? No, there were 25. The issue here is not the military significance or the failure of ISIS. You in India are the sons and daughters today of the people who created the Islamic State of Pakistan. How dare you say that you don't know what is ISIS? This is the land that was cut and amputated in the name of Islam to create a country where there would be superior Muslims at the top and the Kafirs at the bottom. And who are the Kafirs? The Hindus, primarily. No Pakistani has met a Jew maybe in 700 generations. They think Pakistan is there from Muhammad bin Qasim's time. I'm not exaggerating. So, what is the ideological basis of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria? It is a more refined and more well-regulated version of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. It is the same as the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is almost an improved, like Windows NT version of the Islamic Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, or the racist sheikdoms that come, amirs that come over here and are treated so well that it's an affront to us. The petty sheikdoms of Qatar, UAE, Sharjah, the pirates of the Persian Gulf have today become the Islamic funders of the Taliban. And it is the Taliban who are the ISIS. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and Mullah Umar predate ISIS by almost a decade. And after billions of dollars that India has spent in Afghanistan, you still burn a woman to death in public. Everyone's witness to that video, haven't you? That is ISIS. That is ISIS. It is ISIS when Lahore was emptied of every Hindu. It is ISIS when million people were driven out of their homes to say we will make a Pak Watan. And who accepted and recognized that infamy that is the Islamic Republic of Pakistan? The Republic of India. You made the mistake of accepting partition, and you, sir, and you, ladies and gentlemen, will face it, and I'll tell you why. Professor Chima might have, I might be reading it wrong. She might not have discussed the Ghazwa Hind part of the David theory, because it is entangled. The hadith of which Muslims believe are two wars. You see, the Europeans are white, so the main war will always be given to them, where it will be covered by CNN and BBC Live. So Dabiq is where the Arabs will fight the Romans. That's class A war. Then you have a class B war, where the Pakistan army goes and kills 3 million Bangladeshis. Sorry, that was also part of Ghazwa Hind, because they were dark, short, black, so they had to be Hindus. We were Pathans, Punjabis, fair, white, we were Muslims. Isn't that the reason why we celebrate Babur but not Lodi? Isn't it that reason why our missiles in Pakistan are called Abdali? The only person to have burned the city of Lahore is celebrated by the residents of Lahore as the hero. That is ISIS. And Ghazwa Hind, though it's seen, heard a lot by the Indian audience because of that red topi guy who comes on his head and you laugh at him. Don't laugh at him. He is telling the truth. Don't laugh at him. Don't believe anyone who says that ISIS is not talking about Islam. ISIS is speaking exactly what is Sharia law. Yes. The fundamental requirement to be a Muslim is, and from I quote from the Quran, to speak the truth even if it goes against you. And here I speak to you as a Muslim. I have to speak the truth even if it gets me deported from India tomorrow. A general by the name of General Kidwai, a lot of the army people over here know about him. For 15 years he headed the Pakistan nuclear assets. If you say weapons, people think he's not an academic. You have to say assets. So the head of the nuclear asset guy goes to the Carnegie Institute and reveals two things. That's fascinating. That Pakistan has now a missile that reaches Tel Aviv, but it's actually targeted at Nicobar. And you can imagine the Israelis say, oh, thank you. You didn't point it as Tel Aviv. Who are they kidding? It is targeted at Israel. Number two, he revealed that Pakistan is the only country on earth that has produced now tactical nuclear missiles, which hit at the range of 20 to 50 miles. Now, think about it. Your strategy, which is called the cold start version, is going to be hit by Pakistan 10 kilometers from Bahawalpur by a nuke, which means that Bahawalpur and these cities, obviously the Indians attack, they try to cut off the north-south highway, right? They're willing to let 1 million people die. They're going to bomb their own people. Not even the Soviet Union or the United States in the Cold War of China contemplated a tactical nuclear weapon. The other option is to blow it 100 miles in the sky and fry up the electronics for the next 25 years in a certain region. Or use both leading missiles to hit Indian coastlines. And all these boats are now stationed in Gwadar, the port city of Balochistan, which is under the Chinese. So, my friends, when colleagues over here talk in terms that India is not the target, let me assure you, India is the target. Because Pakistan is ISIS and all the other concepts that have gone through were never, and Arab will never be a Muslim first. The Arab doctrine of racism towards the colored person is part of Sharia law as determined by Ibn Taymiyyah and interpreted by Ibn Kathir, the 13th, 14th century academics who have enabled Sharia law. They say it is a sin for an Indian or a black Muslim to consider himself equal to an Arab. Therefore, the term in Middle East is always Arabs and Muslims. It is never, the term Muslim is never used. The Iranians, they don't consider themselves equal to the Shia. The word for Indians is Shia, the Qaeda as we use it. Yeah. Now, if up to 1947, in the last 100 years, no Iranian wanted an Islamic state, no Arab wanted an Islamic state, no Indonesian, no Malaysian, who wanted an Islamic state? Mr. Iqbal and Mr. Jinnah. Thank God for the inferiority complexes that the grandparents were Hindu, that we had to endure their crisis with 5 million people dead so far. On one side of this battle with Islamism are people who wish to die.
On the other side are people who wish to get American citizenship, get a degree, get retirement benefits, get a better posting somewhere in Goa or Darjeeling, or get a military attache's appointment somewhere in Washington. None of the Indians who want to fight want to die. Every Pakistani who wants to fight wants to die. This is the equation that we have not understood. From the death cult that Professor Chima outlined in very polite language, is the belief that life on Earth is a transit lounge. And when you live in a transit lounge, you never care who takes care of the toilet. You keep looking at that board and say, where is my next connecting flight? Oh, damn it, it's delayed. The sooner you get it, the better it is. And where you want to go? Paradise. If your entire view of the world is to go to paradise, the only Muslim left who doesn't want to do that is the secular Muslim, or the liberal Muslim, or the atheist, or the member of the Communist Party. You know, या किवाई साहब कुछ दे या शबाना आदमी के फादर इस टाइप के लोग तो नहीं मिलते ना। अब आपको सुबह से शाम तक आपको वो चर्यास्थान मिल रहा है कि you are too scared to say that in the middle of Cochin I saw posters of rulers of the United Arab Emirates. I saw more burqas and Alibaba biryani with how has Alibaba got to do with biryani and Cochin? And it's everywhere. And what has Kashmiri artifacts got to do with Kerala? Nobody is bothered why every Indian is involved in his own Reaganist right-wing promotion to be the CEO or the son to be the CEO and the daughter to marry someone's CEO. That's your entire life, and Pakistanis are looking at you and having the last laugh. Because they are involved in international politics. The ISI can cause a communal riot in any Indian city at 24 hours notice. This is their claim made. So no. And what is the Indian response? It is either hatred towards Muslims by some sections or complete ambivalence. They are more interested in what's the latest movie that's come out, The Seven Magnificent, or some Hollywood stuff. Wahan rush hai. Nobody knows ki Yemen mein kya hua. You tell me how many Indians are worried that there are thousands of Indians caught up in a damn civil war that has nothing to do with Shia or Sunni. Absolutely nothing. ISIS is Pakistan, ISIS is Iran, ISIS is Saudi Arabia. Anyone wasting their time looking at Zarqawi, looking at Baghdadi, looking at Fine-Tune is making a mistake. And I'll tell you why. 750 AD, Damascus. The entire Umayyad ruling class of about 1,000 people, each one of them was slaughtered and killed by a general called Abu Muslim, who laid the foundation for the Abbasides. There was no Israel, there was no America, there was no Hindutva over there. There was nothing, no RSS, no BJP, nothing. We got ourselves with 1,000 people from the ruling class and cut them off. But we didn't stop there. We didn't have dinner over the bodies of the wounded people crying and yelling to destroy the Umayyads. And only one man escaped and he set up the Umayyad dynasty in Spain. 750, you have a problem? Let's talk about the first caliph of Islam, Caliph Abu Bakr. The first war fought under Islam is called the Wars of Apostasy, where anyone who said, the Prophet Muhammad is dead, I am no longer Muslim, you have to die. Once you have established this in the golden rule of Islam, that becomes the de facto rule if you want to rule by Islam. That is my point. All of this is part of our history, we can't change it. All people have histories that they have to be sorry about. The point forward is you say cut religiosity to the bare minimum in a secular society. The answer, India and the United States and non-Muslim countries that are fighting ISIS is they are taking religiosity and pushing it up. As if this is the way to counter jihad. No, you're feeding the jihad. And you, as Indians, are only people on earth who can fight this. Because only in India is there Mr. Maruf or MJ Akbar or General Abbas or people who come and say on television that Pakistan is a rotten state. And for that, I've been a great admirer of Mr. Maruf for you should listen to what Pakistanis say about the Indians who stand up for India. An Indian Muslim stand up for India, believe me, with far more vigor than any other group. You are the only people who can destroy ISIS. But you have to do one thing. And this is where the Muslims come. Will you be prepared to change the name of Aurangzeb Road to that? एक काम कर दे और पूरी आईसिस के मुंह पे वो तमाचा लगेगा कि ये अपनी अपनी गारों में जाके रोएंगे। आपने जब एक कातिल को बनाया अपना हीरो, जिसने अपने बाप को मारा, भाई को मारा, बेटी को मारा, बहन को मारा, बेटे को मारा, शियों को मारा, दाऊदी बोहरों को मारा, तवज्जो को मारा, सारी नमाजों को मारा, उसकी इमेज बनाने के साथ वो तो बड़ा नेक आदमी था, चूंकि सीधा था, उससे गुजारा होता था। If Pakistan has to be taken to task for naming its missiles, Taimur and that murder, then India has to be taken for task for celebrating not Tara Shikoh, but Aurangzeb. And जब तक आप दारा शिकोह को अपना हीरो नहीं मानेंगे, जिस शख्स ने आपकी उपनिषद को लेकर ट्रांसलेट किया फारसी में, फारसी से बेचारे ने भेजा फ्रेंच में, फ्रेंच से वो इंग्लिश में ट्रांसलेट हुई, पूरी दुनिया में हिंदुइज्म का नाम एक मुसलमान ने किया। इसको आपने पंजाबी में कहते हैं खुद लाता हूँ। Do you know that not a single Muslim child is named Dara? उसको छोड़ो। There's not a single Muslim in Punjab who's named Bulle Shah. हर शख्स का नाम है तारिक फतेह। क्या तारिक, the man who butchered and conquered Spain? मेरे भाई का नाम क्या? महमूद। He invaded Somnath and broke it up. We are prisoners of our own nation. जब तक हिंदुस्तान के लोग अपने नाम ना छोड़े, लेकिन एक आध बच्चे का नाम तो दिलीप रखेगा, वो दिलीप कुमार है ना, क्या वो हो सकता है तो आपका बेटा भी हो सकता है। रखिए आप दारा शिकोह को सामने लाएं और कहें ये है हमारा हीरो। उसके बाद आप मुझे बुलाएं, मैं देखता हूँ मैं यहाँ क्या करता हूँ। और अगर उसका काला पेंट मारना है, I swear I am willing to get arrested by your dreaded Delhi police for painting black, making 3 or 4 suggestions which are very practical. But northern Indians, especially from Punjab and UP, बड़ी करवा सा लगता है। एक काम कर, stop all talks, trade and exchanges with Pakistan. Cancel it. They have nothing to offer to you. That Urdu is worse than your Urdu. Their IT and your IT is not the same. Your IT is information technology, their IT is international terrorism. ये जो आपने अमन की आशा का तमाशा इसमें सिर्फ ISI की आंखियां आ रही हैं और आपका बेड़ा गर्क हो रहा है। They're spinning circles around you, and Indians have an inferiority complex. Anyone who throws 2 Urdu words in any Punjabi, that guy is determined to be an intellectual. हमारे पंजाबी बोलते हैं ढोले, हर क्या नाम उर्दू होगा? Why? It's not a language. I'm Punjabi. It was thrust on me by the 1 million UPIs that we pushed into our country to to destroy Sindhi, Punjabi, Balochi and Pashto. Forget about the Bangla. Band karenge aman ki aasha. None of this catches up. And the test to this is what? दिल्ली से जाता हुआ आदमी पाकिस्तान की तरफ रुकता है कहाँ? लाहौर में। लाहौर से आता हुआ आदमी कहाँ रुकता है? अमृतसर में तो नहीं रुकता, ना जलंधर में, ना लुधियाना में, ना पानीपत में, ना पटियाला में। वो जाता है दिल्ली, जिसका उससे कोई ताल्लुक नहीं। वो पंजाबी है, वो क्या देख रहा है जाके? ये हमारा कुतुब मीनार है, हमने 1000 साल इनको हुकूमत किया। This is what is happening by you bending over backward. You have to understand that there is not a single Pakistani. When I say Pakistani, I mean two people: Punjabi Muslims and the Urdu-speaking UPIs that you exported to us, and which we had to keep, even though the expiry date was gone. These two groups of people are Pakistanis. The rest of the Baloch who want freedom from Pakistan, they were occupied. The Pashtuns have been ruined by the Arab and Punjabi occupation of the intellect. The Sindhis, as you know, were the only part of Pakistan where no Hindu was killed. And Hindus still live, but they have been thrown out from there. So when I say Pakistan, I mean specifically the two elements that form its military and its civilian bureaucracy. The number third request I have is for Indian Muslims, for goodness sake, support the liberation movement of Balochistan. फलस्तीन बहुत दूर है, ये अरबों की खिदमत करना बंद कर दें। आपके पड़ोस में बलूचिस्तान है। 1948 में the Pakistan army invaded it after it had lost the battle in Kashmir. They hung up 50,000 जवान बच्चा इसको घायल है बलूचिस्तान में। If not India, who? When Talat wanted to join the Indian Union, Jawaharlal Nehru told Oscar Bissinger, कोई बात नहीं बनेगी, इनके साथ ही मिल जाओ. It's not written about. These are, I have lived in a prison in Balochistan for a year. I have worked since '67 with the Baloch leaders. Their Bashmani recently passed away. This is their aim. And when the Sultanate of Oman wanted to sell the port of Gwadar to India, India said no. Today it is a submarine, a nuclear submarine base for the Chinese Navy. So, take up the cause of independence of Balochistan and Kyrgyzstan, because they are occupied lands and they have been occupied by fellow Muslims. Western Sahara has been occupied by Morocco since 1974. West Papua has been occupied by Indonesia since 1948. Why is it that only the pain of Gaza is felt in the hearts of Indian Muslims? Are the Baloch children of lesser gods? बिल्कुल आपके करीब हैं, वो पूछने वाला नहीं है उनको. And finally, I suggest to all Indians, especially people in think tanks like this, one day you'll have to call the bluff of Kashmir on Pakistan. I'm very disappointed that at JNU I couldn't find even one of the 200 students I was speaking to who had read the UN Security Council resolution on Kashmir. I doubt if many people in India have, because they are so tied up in rhetoric and cliches of 1972. They use the word bilateral agreement. They are caught up like clerks trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle during the work hours. What is the Kashmir Security Council resolution? It calls for the immediate withdrawal of all Pakistani troops from areas that they were not in Jammu and Kashmir state as of August 14, 1947. Now guess which other armies in Jammu and Kashmir? Chinese. There are 50,000 Chinese troops in Gilgit-Baltistan that are building the tunnels and roads for their excavation agreements with Afghanistan straight into China. Do you think Pakistan, after taking nearly $20 billion and the price for that land, is going to tell the Chinese, I think it's time for you to move your army? You think the Chinese are just going to move? They don't even move when they enter Indian territory until you have to send in, should send in, don't. that's a different story. They cannot leave it. The Pakistanis can never entertain the thought of even contemplating moving 1 million people out of what is called Azad Kashmir, which is Pakistan occupied Kashmir. You have been winning the debate at the UN by not having Islamists and ISIS brings up Kashmir and Ghazwa Hind in the same bracket. And you will not have peace till you counter them with ideological and propaganda communication. Because your enemy is one of the most wiliest, evil folks that money can buy, because they could buy an Assistant Secretary of State of the United States of America. You all know the case of Robin Rafai. Yeah? Can you imagine what the Saudis can buy? So, India is at the epicenter of what ISIS wishes to destroy, to get to a point that Professor Chima pointed out, which is the gateway to the end of human civilization. And I missed one point that was linked to the tactical missile issue. The hadith that she pointed out says that the final battle will not be fought other than bows and arrows and shields and swords, right now? Yeah. What does that mean? You have a nuclear holocaust. Everyone's got stones and swords and shields. Once you take that technology, and it is written in the ISIS manuals, this is what we have to accomplish to end human civilization as we know, to go back to the time when Muslims were equal to non-Muslims, but everybody had to fight with a sword, and then we will beat the crap out of them because they are used to technology and we are still living in the stone age. That is what is driving them. It's not a joke. This is what propels them, and which you have to understand, that the stakes are high, and if you think that the Islamists do not have a hand on news, who do you think is running the Pakistan news? Do you think the Pakistani generals with beards that go down to their ankles are simply there for decoration? There are two types of generals in the Pakistan army: the whiskey generals and the mullah generals. The whiskey generals are Muslim patriots who don't pray but wish for Taimur, and the mullah generals who seem to be more honest wish to die, but want to take all of India with them. So don't think this is too far away. This is not about Iraq, this is not about Syria, this is about Pakistan and India. Thank you very much.